Real leaders leave a legacy. They capture the hearts and minds of their teams. Their origin story puts the safety and well-being of their people first. Great companies ubiquitously have safe yet productive operations. For those companies, safety is an investment, not a cost for the C-suite. It's a real topic of daily focus. This is The Safety Guru with your host, Eric McCroskey, a globally recognized ops and safety guru, public speaker, and author. Are you ready to leave a safety legacy? Your legacy success story begins now.
Hi, and welcome to The Safety Guru. I'm Eric McCroskey, and today I'm very excited to have with me Nick Marks. He's a statistician with a soul. He's got 25 years working with organizations to improve happiness, quality of life, and organizations in general. A phenomenal speaker. He's also launched a tool called Friday Pulse. We'll get into that very soon. But Nick, welcome to the show, and I'd love to hear from you a little bit about your passion, how you got into all of this, and how you became a statistician with a soul, as a client once called you.
Yes, it's one of my favorite client quotes. So, and I think in some ways what it captures is I've got this slightly odd mix in that, yes, I am a statistician, but my mother was a family therapist, and I trained as a therapist when I was young. So I sort of have these soft people skills as well, and it probably becomes inevitable that I become the guy that starts measuring people's experience of life, their happiness, their well-being. It took a long time to evolve into that. You know, I did a lot of work on sustainability, quality of life, health statistics first, and then slowly moved into that area. And I used to work in think tanks, so I used to advise the Tony Blair government and then the David Cameron government on how to measure well-being, and led a lot of work there in a very exciting time in the 2000s where the British government started to take this very seriously. And then about 7-8 years ago, I started to think about businesses and moved into that area. And so I now have a business called Friday Pulse, which measures and improves employee experience. And that's what I do now.
That's a phenomenal background. So one of the themes that's incredibly important when you're trying to improve safety outcomes is that, or even well-being and all of those components, is this element of psychological safety within the business. Can you share a little bit about your thinking, your research, and what you've seen around the importance of psychological safety and maybe some ideas on how to drive it forward within businesses?
Yeah, I mean, it's a phrase I think coined by Amy Edmondson and certainly popularized by Google. And it's really trust. It's the and trust is really about consistency of behavior. And in a team, when if you're going to experiment, you're going to be innovative, you're going to collaborate, then you need to have the freedom to express yourself and the security that you will know that you won't be the spirit of your motivation for doing that will be recognized, even if the outcome doesn't coach exactly where we are. So it becomes more about process and about how we do that. And I think that psychological safety, and of course, if you're in certain parts of the world, physical safety, I mean, there's still all parts of the developing world where physical safety at workplace is not guaranteed, so right. But we've actually luckily got legislation in North America and Europe where those things are covered. But it becomes really important to people's experience, because just like if you've got a parent who's very unreliable, inconsistent, that's actually the worst type of parenting. And it's the same with a boss. I mean, it's if you don't really know if the boss's mood is always going to change, or this, or you suddenly get an earful for something which you weren't expecting to, or even when you get praised for something we weren't expecting to, that inconsistency is very difficult to deal with. So it's about consistency, it's about reliability, it's about support, and there's lots of evidence that when people are in those environments, that not only the teams are more innovative, but people enjoy working in them more, and they go hand in hand. I mean, I wouldn't say it's the only cause of people's positive experience, but it's a very significant one.
Interesting. So the other element is that we've talked about when we had prior conversations together is that this element that feelings are data. Can you share a little bit about kind of that element, and is it real? Is it tangible? I know a lot of leaders I've talked to over the years, particularly operational leaders, doubt the reliability of that data. They don't even necessarily seeing it as real tangible data. So share some thoughts and insights on that.
So the expression feelings of data for me comes from both of those sources. I mean, it's in some ways a sort of mixture between that statistics and happiness. And And it's actually the draft title for a TEDx talk I was going to do last year, which obviously got cancelled because of COVID. but my idea really is that our feelings, firstly, just from a purely neuroscience perspective or psychology perspective, or even evolutionary perspective, feelings come before cognition. So beings, animals, organisms were, in a sense, sentient before they were cognitive, and we needed to feel whether we're in the right environment. So in a sense, our feelings give us information about whether we're a good fit in our environment at a very, very basic biological level. So we can feel creeped out by something without really knowing what it is. The sensation is there before we've got the awareness about precisely what it is. So we can feel secure in an environment without really knowing exactly why. And that's because that's how feelings work in the organism. And in that sense, can we turn them into data? What is data? So data can be quantitative, it can be qualitative, it can be different types. But
Sure.
I statistically try and capture that data with it's just basically a very simple good bad signal. So I'll ask people things like, how have you felt at work this week? Were you very unhappy to very happy? And you get that into a 1 to 5 scale or whatever, and people can answer that question. They can think, oh, this week, yeah, it was a good week, or this week it was a bad week, and they give you an answer on that. And that's what I mean by turning feelings into data in this sense, in that you can put a number to it. And when you do that, you get very interesting time trend data that by asking about a time specific period, you see the ups and downs. And the reality is that we're not happy all the time. That actually would be kind of dysfunctional, because you would be overriding that things sometimes can be bad. The environment changes. It would have been pretty weird to have been exceptionally happy in March this year.
Really?
And, yeah. and this year's been really hard, hasn't it? And it's like, so it's perfectly fine to have a goal that you want to be happy, but to also accept the fact you're not going to be happy all the time. Those are not conflicting things to want to do.
So you touched on the March and feelings, and you've done some analysis of data through the last several months. How has it revealed, or what was the main takeaway that you saw across multiple different organizations?
Yeah, so we ask all across our client base, that question, and we basically provide data for team and senior leaders on people's experience of work, and we do it in real time. Well, real time, we do it weekly, in saying, this is how people's weeks have gone. So we've got 52. Well, we haven't quite got 52 measures this year. We've got like 48 or 50, whatever it is we're up to now. And so we can see the whole trend through the year. And what we had was a perfectly normal year in January, February, March. I mean, January doesn't tend to be the happiest month anyway. You've just come out of the Christmas period, so it's always a little bit suppressed after that. People are happy after Christmas. They come back, oh, well, the weather's pretty bad in certainly in Europe, certainly in England, in January, February, it's the worst time of the year. So, people aren't most happy, but then, starting to pick up in March, and then boom, the week beginning, I think something like the 12th of March, we suddenly had, I was working in London. In the beginning of the week, the underground was normal, the tube was normal. And by Thursday, half of the traffic had gone. It was extraordinary just to see it drift away from us. And then, the next week we had our lockdown, and it was very, very scary in March, and it hit our data, all our clients, it plummeted. And then we saw a slow climb back up again. But in those first weeks, there was a lot of pressure on HR departments, everybody to scramble home. Have you got the right equipment? Can we support you? How do you do that? Everyone is, worrying about their mother, their kids, whatever they're worried about. Suddenly kids were home from schools. There's a huge pressure, and all of that comes out in our data. And then we basically see a slight return back to where we were over a period of several months. But then it's never got back to quite where it was. We're still 5-10 points down. We present our data 0 to 100 scale. Pre-COVID, the average was 70. It's now 65. So we've seen a drop over that time, significant drop actually, but not as bad as it was in the week, the week that COVID struck, where it's more down like 50. So it's a big impact, and you need data every week to see that. So you can basically imagine it as a graph, and of course we see that in lots of our clients. They have setbacks. Teams have setbacks. Individuals have setbacks. But to have a global setback like that, we'll never see it again, I don't think. But it was just a huge, huge impact. Yeah.
Let's hope we don't see it ever again.
Yeah.
Let's
hope.
So I'm a CEO. I get this regular data point, this pulse on my business. What can I do with that information? Because some might argue it's too much information. how can I use that to shift my decisions, my actions? And even if you have some examples from the last few months, how it's helped organizations and businesses would be phenomenal.
Yeah. So the way that we help people use the data is that we feed it back to the right level of the organization. I do think that the best place to act is at the team level. I'm sure it's the same for safety and everything, is that it's the people you work most closely with. Can you rely on the people around you? Can you work together? Can you have the same goals and collaborate? And what we basically do is feedback data, a mixture of qualitative and quantitative data. So we feedback, what's your score last week? But we also ask people, what's gone well for you last week, what hasn't, and basically allow people to build on what's gone well and deal with what hasn't. And it's getting into that weekly flow of people's work by doing a little and often that you make the most changes. You basically get them talking about their experience, and then that validates that it's actually useful to listen to people's experience. And basically everybody in an organization is kind of like a sensor. They're sensing everything around them. It's like, but that data was never collected before. It's there's knowledge. Like whenever there's a sort of big corporate failure, when they do the investigation afterwards, people within the organization knew
something was up.
They hadn't, the data, it's very rare that something hits with that totally blindsides. There's people that know. And in a sense, you need to gather that data in a way and encourage people to share not only their successes, but their concerns, because it's valid to have concerns about what's going on, and if you collect that quickly, you can act on it quickly. And I think that's what most organizations try and do in some way, is be responsive to what's going on. And we're a product that helps, platform that helps with that. And we've seen lots of different examples. The issue with COVID and working from home was it was so variable, the experience for people.
Sure.
People like me whose children are left home, and I live with my wife, who I not only love, I like. I enjoy spending time with her. So it wasn't difficult to spend time with Zoe. Yeah. Whereas for some people, my sister's got divorced in COVID. I mean,
that would be a horrible experience. Yeah.
Well, 3 years too late, in my opinion, but that's a different matter. And other people were stuck at home with young children, which was very, very difficult. 3 or 4 of my team have got children under the age of 5, and it was driving them up the wall. It wasn't about their work. Was a very difficult. So there was different things that we needed to do. And of course, when you've got a bit of data on that, you can start thinking about how you do that. And then you've got teams that are struggling. So, my organization has not been adversely affected by COVID. We've had to change. We've had to pivot. I had to lay off some people that were doing events work. But we've actually recruited into other areas. So we've had to do some changes. It hasn't been a disaster. But if you're in hospitality, it was right the way across the board. It was, it's just appalling. And if you're in businesses depend on that, or so it's how do you respond differently? And large organizations have got sections that probably done well and sections that haven't. And it's how do you differentiate your policies towards those people? And we've got clients that have done, brilliant work in this area, really, really helping people, cope with it. And even in my organization, we've gone to a 4-day week, for example, because I think boundaries between work and life have got so collapsed, and burnout is such a big issue with people working from home and remotely. They haven't got that human contact, but they also, just work's always there. It's sort of, we're all working from home. I'm working from home. You probably are. You're working from home. And it's like, when does work stop? When does life start? It becomes harder. So I've actually just made a bargain with my employees that let's work hard for 4 days and have 3 days off and do other things. And that's quite a radical policy. We can do that in my field. It doesn't always work with some things because it's 24/7. But it's how you look after your employees, I think, is changing very dramatically.
Absolutely. And I think what you shared is consistent with all the organization I've seen. For some people, it's been phenomenal. So for me, the secret blessing is I normally spend almost all my time on a plane, and now I get to spend time at home enjoying kind of experiences with my wife. Like you said, it's a very different experience, but I see others who are constantly trying to balance homeschooling and all of those components all at the same time and trying to do work, and they don't necessarily have a partner that can help. But it's a very, very different experience. But it gives you insights on how I can lead, how I can drive change, how I can drive impact on the themes that are relevant for my workforce at this point in time. When One of the themes I'd like to explore is the impact that you can get from a mental health standpoint, because we know the link between mental health, mental well-being, and safety, overall safety culture, incredibly linked. Unfortunately, not all organizations are talking about that link. More and more starting to drive visibility, awareness to the importance of mental health. What's your thoughts around mental health well-being, and what you're able to gather from a pulse within your business?
So, I mean, mental health is, still a lot of stigma around it,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of work going on about destigmatizing it. But this is just a story from just 2 years ago. I know I spoke at a conference on it, a group called Minds at Work here in the UK, who do a lot of work on mental health at work, and a fireman went off work for being injured in a fire, and he was off work for 6 months, and 100 colleagues came to see him. He then had stress 2 years later, and one colleague came to see him, and we're still terrified of that sort of mental health breakdown, breakthrough, whatever it is, and it's that is starting to change. I mean, we see it being led probably sometimes, yes, at work, but we also see it being led in the sort of celebrity world. Like there's a band called Little Mix. I don't know if you got teens who are interested into them, but one of them has decided to retire from the band for mental health reasons, and it's not getting poo-pooed. It's getting really supported out there. It's basically saying, yes, you need to look after yourself. That's what you need to do. And so I think we're talking more and more about it, and it's becoming more and more accepted, and it's more accepted in the work. But the issue is, it feels, a lot of people are frightened of it because they're frightened of their own mental health. They're frightened if we stopped going forward, would we fall over? I think Einstein once said, life is like riding a bicycle. If you stop pedaling, you fall over, and there's a sort of feeling that if we don't continue, you'll suddenly collapse. And I think that's really unwise, because I think when the end happens is burnout happens, and burnout tends to be from people who engaged in their work, but they go the extra mile, and that isn't the same as mental health. It's a different issue, but it's a problem. But mental health, I think it's about working with people. There's a lot of neurologically atypical people, particularly in tech businesses and whatever like that. Probably 20% of the population are what we could call neurologically atypical. And that's a lot of the workforce. And so it's about, and they're often brilliant at all sorts of things. They just need some different boundaries. And I don't really understand why. I think that this straight jacket of like, you work from 9 to 5 or 10 to 6, or you work this overtime, we do that, is going. I mean, I used he doesn't actually work for us anymore, but I had an employee who really did struggle every few months with something. But I just used to say to him, well, if you need 2 days off, you have 2 days off, and I knew he'd make it up, because he wasn't irresponsible. He was couldn't get out of bed that day. And you don't help it by sort of saying, oh, pull yourself together. That's not how it works.
That won't help. Right.
No. You do it by being kind and compassionate to them, and talking, yes, about the business needs, but also about what their needs are. And it's a sort of dance between those two. It's like employing, I mean, I'm going to say particularly women, but it's parents with young children, really. But I've had a lot of people have maternity leave or have children, during my time working people. If you're kind to them, they come back and they give you everything. So it's being enlightened in your leadership and doing it. And mental health is the same, really, in that it's accepting that people's anxiety is there, or if it's panic attacks or it's depression. This is something that they're living with. It's not something, and it does get triggered by environments, in that if you put too much stress on them, or put them in a team that really doesn't help, then then it's going to get exaggerated. But you can work with it. I mean, like one of the supermarkets and chains in the UK, they work with a lot of people with depression, and what you don't want to do is shove them at the back of a dark warehouse, because that's basically going to make their problems worse. If you put them in a bright, light place where they can interact with other people, which might be in the car parks doing trolleys, it might be helping pack bags, it might be doing shelves where they're in the light, they're much better. If you put them in a dark warehouse, they're not going to do well. And it's understanding what the triggers are for them, listening to them, and working with it. And people tend to thrive when they feel cared about. So and I'm that's definitely the side of the fence I'm on. I know that some people have other views on that, but I think that we can work with people from all walks of life, and if you respect them, they respect you back 95% of the time, and the 5% of the time they don't, well, then deal with it. Let's assume the best.
Correct.
And then occasionally you deal with the things that don't work.
Yeah, and I think with the pulse that you're advocating is you're getting a sense for themes within the business that are emerging, so you can better adapt and be more enlightened in terms of your comments before. Last question I want to throw. We talked about feelings or data. How do you deal with a skeptic? Because I've come across engineers that will say it's not real data, perception data, input of that nature is not real data. How do you overcome that challenge?
Well, I mean, engineers are brilliant to talk to about this because they understand feedback. And right. If you start explaining it to them in analogies, they can hear about, basically a thermometer, a governor in a steam engine, whatever, is a feedback loop, which is basically, I always talk about governors in a steam engine, where more steam goes through, governors pull swing around, and it starts closing the steam in. It's basically a feedback loop. Emotions are the same in lots of ways. Some of them are positive reinforcing, some of them are negative dampening, but they're basically helping us act efficiently in the world. And so it is data. It's not the same data. So when you've got so-called objective data, you're counting physical things. When you have subjective data, you're using scales. You're using things which basically people are giving you a sense of the difference. So when I ask people, how have you felt at work this week? I give them 5 response codes: very unhappy, unhappy, okay, happy, very happy. People can answer that. We don't know precisely that if the move from 3 to the 4 is the same as from 1 to 2. In fact, I can tell you it isn't. I know the data quite well, but it is ordered. The data is ordered. And so you can work with that data. It's just you have to work with it differently. You also have to understand you're not maximizing. People often think that take any variable, you're going to maximize it. You're optimizing with subjective data. Actually, you don't want people to be, you don't want them to be. It's unrealistic for people to be very happy all of the time. You actually kind of want to know when they're feeling very happy, and you want to know when they're only feeling happy, and you want to know when they're feeling okay. And that is, data is feedback, and it's learning. I mean, the whole way that organizations and us as individuals is that we learn. So we need to have feedback that helps us learn. And that's how I use the data. And so, we create effectively what we call a happiness KPI for a business, which is this data on weekly team happiness, and it's a people metric for people, for organizations. And organizations don't have good people metrics. They tend to have what we call lagging indicators, like how many people didn't turn up for work, how many people left us, or we do an engagement survey once a year which gives you a snapshot. Experience is really fluid. It's not a snapshot. It's not even a series of snapshots. You could have done a snapshot in February this year, and then 3 months later, and 3 months is a really frequent pulse survey, you're set up March, April, you're May. Well, you just basically see almost a flat line. You've just missed the whole dramatic, interesting part, and so, by taking data more frequently, you get that fluidity. And basically our experience is fluid. It's always ebbing and flowing. It's you can take people's, I measure weekly because that's convenient, it's good for work, but you could measure people's experience through a morning and you'd have it going up and down. You could measure it through an hour and it'd be going up and down. You could measure it through a year, a lifetime. There's different wavelengths if you want to do of it. So it absolutely is data. It's data that's correlated and predicts things. We know that people who have more good weeks than bad weeks, they're happier at work, are more productive. We know they stay longer. We know they're more creative and innovative. We know that they have a better safety record. I want to go back to that, because if you care about the machinery you're working with, or you care about your colleagues, you take care and you avoid you deal with risks, and you avoid things getting out of control, which most accidents are a series of errors, aren't they? And if you've got that communication and collaboration, well, it all works out better. So it's not only is it data, it's useful data, and it predicts future good outcomes. So you should take it seriously, is my opinion.
I think that's phenomenal. Last parting point: you launched recently a tool called Friday One. Can you share a little bit about what it is and how it can help businesses?
Yeah, so Friday One is Friday Pulse is the business we have, which creates platforms for teams and organizations. So we wanted to do something that was for individuals. People always ask us, can't we do something on our own? And so we've created Friday One, which is basically a sort of an individual these are the key drivers to happiness at work. How are you doing on it? So if you've ever taken one of those tests like 16 personalities or Myers-Briggs, you do them and they give you a report back. Well, it's the same thing, but it's context. So one of my critiques of those sort of personality tests is that they're context free. And actually, we change personalities, we change who we are, we change how we feel in different contexts. So our context is very specifically your work, and it's your work now when you fill it out. And basically, we ask you how you're doing on the 5 big drivers, which are about relationships, about fairness in the system, about autonomy, about learning, and about purpose. So we call those connect, be fair, empower, challenge, inspire. So you ask 3 questions on each and some demographic questions so we can give you some benchmarks, and you get a lovely report. And it's to help you reflect on your work and how you're doing. And that does form part of our Friday Pulse when we do it for a whole organization, but this is just a free tool for individuals to do and have fun with.
And can they track themselves in terms of time and how they're progressing, or is it more a one-time snap?
It is a one-time snap, which is why we call it Friday One. And the reason we haven't done that is all sorts of GDPR problems of storing people's data with a free tool. And you do get into, sort of things. So we decided we'd do a snapshot. We may do something tracking, but you have to get a little bit fancier with that stuff. And so at the moment it's a snapshot, and you can save the PDF and do it again 3 months later and look at it. But we don't hold your data in any way. We didn't want to get into that really. And you just go to friday1.com and take the test, and it's just there. And as I say, it's just free and fun to use.
Love it. Well, thank you very much, Nick, for taking the time, for connecting, sharing your thoughts on feelings and the impact on the business, and great insights in terms of how people can shift from week to week, from day to day, from hour to hour, based on the context, the environment they're in.
Thank you very much indeed.
Like what we do? Share this on your socials and tell everyone. Thank you for listening to the Safety Guru on C-Suite Radio. Leave a legacy, distinguish yourself from the pack, grow your success, capture the hearts and minds of your teams, fuel your future. Come back in 2 weeks for the next episode, or listen to our sister show with the Ops Guru, Eric McCroskey.